Ah, fall. When green leaves change to red, orange, and yellow. When the weather changes from warm to cool. Usually, in swimming, when long course changes to short course. And when swimmers change from developmental to intermediate, intermediate to performance, performance to senior prep, and senior prep to senior. This is Swim Coach Dad Podcast, and we're talking about practice groups and avoiding group envy. Hey, this is Coach Scott Wisner with Victor Swim Club, and in this episode, we're going to cover one of the topics that has over my career been one of the main sources of conflict between parents and coaches, and that's which group your kid should be in. There's this idea that the more advanced level of the group, the better the coaching. To be honest, my wife Amy, as many of you know, is a much better coach for newer swimmers than I am. My career has been mostly working with senior prep, senior, and national level swimmers, so that's just what I'm better equipped for. And so most of our younger groups are better off with the coaches that they have. I think of the groups in two divisions, skills groups and training groups. So skills groups in our case are developmental and intermediate. We're learning the strokes, proper technique, learning how to do proper turns, starts and finishes. That's what is most important for those groups. It's like learning the scales when learning to play a musical instrument, but for us, we try to make this fun. Training groups focus more and more on conditioning and racing with less time spent on technique in each group. If we peak at something around 8,000 yards per practice for a senior group and a 2-hour practice, senior prep is usually about 75% of that, or 6,000 yards. And performance is something around 50% of that, or 4,000 per practice on average. Sets are longer, intervals are faster with each group that you go up, and more is expected with each advancement in the training groups. Pushing swimmers into the groups that do more training before they're ready in terms of stroke development, that really doesn't work well. It'll make swimming in the training groups harder, and really, we've seen it result in injuries from poor stroke technique. Also, a lot of kids that aren't secure in the other all four strokes, really have a tough time when they get up to the upper levels because we do a lot more IM swimming. We also expect them to be able to do longer swims of fly, and that usually is a struggle for a swimmer that doesn't have the background that they need. Coaches want swimmers to do well, improve, enjoy the sport in the long term. If they're under challenged, they'll stagnate. If they're over challenged, they'll struggle, get frustrated, maybe even get hurt. There's no advantage for a coach to keep a swimmer down. We want swimmers to grow and develop and learn to swim the strokes properly, but we're working for the long term here. Pushing them into the training groups too soon cuts that stroke development short, and it really doesn't help the swimmer later on. And that's one thing we all need to worry about, is making sure the swimmer develops properly and becomes a complete swimmer, not just someone that can swim one stroke or one event really well. I coached a swimmer once who was forced to stay down in a lower group by the parent board of the club, where I was coaching, and even though she was faster than everyone in the next group up, she was getting in the way of her group because she was so much faster than everyone in her group. The board, who had several members with children in the next group, didn't want the swimmer to embarrass their children in that upper group because she was so much younger. Not only was she in the way in her group that she was stuck in, but she was also getting bored, not progressing as she should have. This is the problem with holding swimmers back. It's also a problem with parents getting in the way of coaches. We also have had swimmers who have gone up from senior prep to senior, and that's especially a difficult one. Going from senior prep to senior who actually moved themselves back down or asked to be moved back down because they were overwhelmed. They were not ready for that level of practice and that level of effort. The practices were a bit more intense, and they were still on the younger side. And even so, we had one swimmer that was moved up from senior prep to senior, and because she could only really swim one stroke, she really had a tough time managing the rest of the practices because we work on all four strokes. So it doesn't always work well, even when we decide to move the swimmer up. Practices have three basic purposes: to learn the skills needed to swim efficiently and fast, and that's really important, efficiently and fast. To push the body to a point where it has to adapt more and more stressful conditions and spend more time with friends and peers in their own age group who could become friends. The other part of it is, in order to best train, the best way to train is with a group and a coach. The least effective way is to train on your own with no swimmers and no coach. And if you have a group where you're so far behind that you don't have anybody to swim with, or so far ahead you don't really have anybody to swim against, then it really is a tough situation. With some groups I've coached, they were so motivated, so committed to their improvement, and they were such a close-knit group that they could have done really well with a chimpanzee coaching them. They were an extreme exceptions. I don't think we coaches can be replaced by chimpanzees, but there's sometimes when the group really does manage itself, and that's really what we want. We want the swimmers to encourage each other and to be the ones that motivate each other. But, you have to be in the same place. Not all swimmers are in the same place in their development at any one time. We have swimmers who are new to the sport, and we have swimmers who have been in the sport for 10 or more years. We have swimmers who need to learn the competitive strokes and learn to swim properly, and we have swimmers who have made junior nationals. We can't have them doing all the same workouts, so we have to break them up into groups based on their development, their age, maturity, a lot of other factors. And there are a lot of parents who want a list. They want a checklist on everything that it takes to get to the next group, and there's a lot of X factors in there. There are sometimes that kids just really need to spend more time in a lower group to be more secure in their swimming so they can have the confidence to swim with the next group up. Groups are usually set by level of development, some by age, capabilities, maturity, and especially in the upper groups. Moving swimmers up when they're really too young, sometimes they don't have a peer group, they're a little bit lost socially, and that is a big part of the training part of swimming, especially in the upper groups, is that whole social aspect. Each group has its goals, from development of strokes, turns, starts, finishes, kicking, pulling, learning how to read the clock, how to do sets properly, how to train effectively, to fully training. Some groups train for an hour at a time, because that's appropriate for that level of development. Some train for 2 hours or more and do more than 8,000 at a time. And we have some kids doing doubles that are in the senior group. Practices are geared to the top swimmers in the group so that everyone is challenged in the group. If practices are written to the middle or lower end of the group, we would get mediocrity. We wouldn't get, the high advancing swimmers that we do get in each age group all along. We have some swimmers that are very well accomplished that are in intermediate, and they have been brought along at the right pace. So we want to make sure that happens, that they develop into good swimmers and successful swimmers and not just mediocre swimmers. There was a swimmer I knew from the Syracuse Chargers who was telling me about a set that she did with two of the best swimmers on the team. A couple of guys who were really top-notch swimmers. They were both ended up being Division I swimmers. And the set was 10 100s, long course meters on 120. They were going 102s. She was going 115s. And she was really psyched that she was in that group. But it really was a completely different set for her than it was for them. And we try and keep the goals of the sets appropriate for what we're doing. Like if we're doing a high rest day, okay, that's fine. But if we're doing a short rest aerobic set like that, where the swimmers are expected to get about 10 seconds to 15 seconds rest and they're getting 5 or they're touching going, that's not really doing the same kind of set. So we want to make sure the swimmers are all able to do it. And we also alter the sets to a certain degree, but we can't completely change the workout. We have swimmers move up from senior prep to senior and then after a few weeks move back down. I told you about that. And that was really an important thing for them to realize, that they weren't in the right place. But I've also had a swimmer that we moved up quickly. And in fact, this one swimmer, when he was 12 years old, he was swimming with my top group in a club that I coached at many years ago. His name was Jim, and he was one of the top 11 and 12 swimmers in the country at the time, and was national age group champion in 6 events. So he really could train with the senior group very well. The age thing was a little bit of an issue. We really worried about him being kind of out of sorts because he was swimming with 16, 17, 18-year-olds. But his age was only an issue for us adults. Really, the other swimmers treated him like a little brother, and they were really great with him. And he actually ended up being an outstanding swimmer, All-American at USC, and really turned out to be an excellent swimmer. But if we had left him down to the lower group, he just would have been the way. He would have been running over kids because he was so much faster. He actually was leading the lanes probably early on. I think he made junior nationals when he was 13. So it was one of those things where we had to move him up, and we just had to make sure that he fit in with a group. We gave him a lot of support to make sure the transition was good. So that's one of those times when moving someone up ahead of time was really necessary, but we had to do a little bit of extra work to make sure that it worked out well. Swimming properly allows swimmers to train more effectively, and that's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that if they push the children up too fast, and before they've really learned the strokes, they don't really have the ability to train effectively with proper strokes, and they'll get hurt. And it also allows them to train more consistency. They can't have a one great day where they swim the whole practice, and then the next 2 days they're dead, or they have to stop and sit out a couple of practices. We really don't want that to happen. We want to be able to have them in so that they're challenged, but they're not overwhelmed. Skipping steps in the progression of groups and pushing swimmers to the next level too soon can change how they look at the sport too. They may look at it as just something that's more like work instead of being something that's fun. And in the early levels, that's really an important thing, as we've said before. Pushing a swimmer to a more advanced group before he or she is ready, not before the parent is ready for them to move up there, is usually worse for their development. And these parents do suffer from a little bit from group envy. They see it as moving them up is going to make them a better swimmer, and that doesn't always work out in the long run. It may work out in the short term, but in the long term it's not in their best interest. We also try and move kids up that are grouped together if they're in the same age group. We don't like necessarily one swimmer who's of a certain age moving up without a couple of friends. So we may have them stay back until we can move a group of them up. And while that may not seem to be fair to one swimmer, it actually is better for them in the long run because they'll have some kind of associations they can make, and they have a group to train with when they do move up. To some, the groups aren't fair, and a word, in my opinion, gets abused and really not used in the right sense. Some parents want their swimmers to be pushed by the coaches to the next step sooner because of the idea that more advanced the group, the better they'll swim. But nothing really can be further from the truth. It's really not, it isn't quite that cut and dry. It's not like if I take 1 aspirin, I'll feel better. If I take 20 aspirin, I'll feel really good. It doesn't really work like that. It works more like, we want them to go at their own level and their own pace, and sometimes we'll hold them back a little bit to make sure that they're secure or so that they can go up with a group. But the end result is we always want them to keep developing. There's no point in bringing a swimmer to a more advanced group if he or she is going to struggle to make intervals, struggle to do the sets properly, struggle to survive the longer practices. And the jump from senior prep to senior has really been the most problematic one. The other ones, it's a little bit more cut and dry, but we have such a big range of swimmers in the senior group that sometimes it's hard for the swimmers to really get to that point. There's absolutely no reason for swimmers to hold back, and a lot of us get accused of that we're holding a swimmer back for some reason or another. We work towards long-term success, and there's nothing that we gain by holding them back other than the long-term success. Swimming world is littered with swimmers who quit the sport because they were pushed too early. Holding a swimmer back until they're ready rarely pushes a swimmer out of the sport. And there's a lot of statistics through USA Swimming of swimmers who get to 11, 12, 13 years old and they leave the sport after being in the top 10 in the country in their lower age groups. We don't really want that. We want them to be great college swimmers. We want them to be great swimmers when they're in their teens. And to do that, we have to keep them in the sport. I've had the good fortune to swim in college with a coach named Ron McKeon. He was actually one of my teammates, and now he's a coach in Australia. And knowing Ron, I followed his daughter Emma and son David's swimming careers from the time they were both fairly young. Emma is a multiple Olympic gold medalist now, but she trained, kind of casually. She trained on her own terms until she was about 14. I don't think she really trained seriously until that point, but she worked on strokes. She didn't compete that seriously, but at a high level. But she worked on her strokes, and she was fairly solid in all those. And then as an older swimmer, she really took off because she had that background. She hadn't really, been pushed up all that quickly. And by the time she was 15, she made their national team to short course world championships. And then she became an Olympian. I think she was probably still in her teens when she first made her first Olympics. So advancing swimmers through the groups isn't a recipe for success always. It's doing it when they're ready, and they have to want to be at that level. So be careful what you ask for. A swimmer's moved up because of a parent demands it. Could be worse for the swimmer. I really have never had much success when I have moved swimmers up because of a parent pressuring me or demanding that I move them up. Most of the time that really backfires because the parent and the swimmer are on different terms. They're in different places. And the swimmer wants to be with their friends, and the parent wants them to move up to the higher groups because of the perception that that's where they're going to get the best coaching. But really, it's got to be this kind of balance where the coaches make the decision, and it's with the swimmer in mind, because we are basically unbiased. We have one goal. Coaches want swimmers to advance in the sport, be the best swimmer he or she can be, reach their potential. But that potential can't be as a 10-year-old. That potential has to be all the way through the sport. We have no reason to hold a swimmer back for the sake of holding him back. As a senior coach, having swimmers come into the group with good technique, able to swim all 4 competitive strokes well, and having the maturity to handle our intense 2-hour practices every night because they're ready will help them reach their potential. And the same goes for the intermediate and development groups. Each of them have their goals and their mission of what they want the swimmers to accomplish. Pushing them up just for the sake of pushing them up just doesn't do anybody any good. Check out our next podcast called I Just Want to Sprint and Other Training Myths. This is Scott Wisner for Swim Coach Dad Podcast and Victor Swimming. Keep on swimming.